Some video games look absolutely gorgeous with great graphics, but never quite take off in mainstream success or live up to their gameplay potential. We've got a bunch of examples of pretty games that flopped in one way or another, be it critically, commercially, or something in between. Let's dive in with number 10 and start with the obvious one, the elephant in the room, Anthem. Anthem, especially pre release, really looked to be like a graphical powerhouse. Early demos of the game highlighted walking around the hub village area in first person with just incredible character models and realistic animations, and lighting in the crowded SCIFI marketplace, leading up to you hopping into your Javelin, your cool Iron Man mech suit that had an insane amount of detail on it and reflections and light, and then the final release ended up looking much flatter than that. The Javelin still looked really cool. The worlds themselves that you flew around were pretty vast, but even if you could still argue one way or another that the game was pretty looking, the actual gameplay itself wasn't so hot. You've probably heard enough about Anthem at this point. It being one of EA and BioWare's biggest flops, that games as a service game that nobody really ended up wanting just because nothing about it really felt quite right. Flying around and blasting things was awesome, but then when it came to missions, world building, enemy types, it didn't really quite scratch the itch that anyone was really looking for. At least, especially for us here. Still, with particle effects, weather effects and environmental effects, and your Javelin and the customization within it, did lead the game to look kind of nice. That is the point of this list. Unfortunately, the game wasn't so hot. Now moving on over to number 9, Marvel's Avengers. Now there is a lot of debate about this one because there is a player base. There are some people out there that like this game, so we're not gonna dunk on you. You do you, everybody has their own favorite game. But for a lot of people, Marvel's Avengers looked incredible. It was this flashy, awesome looking game with realistic looking Marvel characters in yet another kind of endlessly replayable games as a service type game that a lot of people just weren't looking for in a Marvel Avengers game. Again, if you're online, if you've ever been on YouTube, you've probably heard most of the complaints about Marvel's Avengers from a gameplay and content offering standpoint, but you can't deny the game looks pretty good. The designs of the characters, even though pre release people were thinking they weren't so great, most of the characters, especially post-launch, do look really cool. The environments are pretty cool, but especially just the actual single-player campaign. The cutscenes, the character work, the looks of some of the costumes, the visual effects, the textures, the lighting, everything looks really damn good. It's unfortunate though that the actual game itself isn't quite what some people were really hoping for, Next over at number 8, we have Reese, Son of Rome, a game that originally served as an Xbox One launch title and a graphical showcase developed by Crytek, who ultimately said that they were not happy with the game's Xbox One sales after launch. From what we know, it seems like well after launch, it eventually went on to sell 1.3 million units, and ultimately, despite the game not being bad, it seemed like for a lot of people it was a little bit of a forgettable experience. You've seen one combat encounter, one mission in the game. You've seen it all, but this game actually does have a little bit of a cult following because it does have some cool moments, but still, it didn't go on to become a franchise or anything like that like people were hoping, but it definitely delivered on the graphics front. Still to this day, believe it or not, despite being an Xbox One launch game, Reese, Son of Rome holds up, especially if you play it on PC, of course, but this game had detailed characters, large and still detailed environments, lots of great lighting and just really cool animations. And combat finishes and stuff, Crytek really went all out on this game. They definitely wanted to be like, hey yes, we are the people that made Crysis and now we're making this cool Roman warrior game, and they 100% succeeded there, so say what you will about Reese, Son of Rome. The fact that it never got a sequel, maybe you want to call it a flop, maybe Crytek themselves call it a flop, but hey, it looked really damn cool. Now next over at number 7, we have Knack. Knack 1 and 2 of course has become a meme thanks to Dunkey, but these harmless little platformer games were really designed to showcase the graphical power of the PlayStation 4, specifically with particle effects and how the character of Knack was built out of a bunch of different voxels all moving around in real time, more than we've ever seen in a character before, and with its fun, light, cartoony, crisp, bright atmosphere. It was definitely bold, but the gameplay itself, the real simplicity of it, the family-friendly nature of it, still didn't help Knack really kind of attach and take off in the living room, whether in North America and in Japan. Actually, Knack 2 reportedly really bombed in Japan after it released and didn't even crack the top 20 software releases when it did actually release, which is painful, especially, like we're talking about games that missed the mark or flopped or flew too close to the sun, but you know what? Knack knew what it was. It did what it set out to do. It was a fun, light-hearted platformer, and it did look very pretty, especially Knack 2 in certain specific moments. It really did look like a Pixar kind of cartoon Disney animation thing come to life. It just didn't quite blow up, and you know what? We can still give Knack the respect he deserves. Now next over at number 6, we have Assassin's Creed Unity, which hot damn, this game looked really good. The unfortunate thing that held it back wasn't that it was a commercial flop. It actually apparently sold pretty well, according to reports. What really held it back and made it fall from grace was the technical state it was initially released at. The console version of the game had terrible frame rate. The PC version wasn't really well optimized, and of course, you've seen all the glitches by now. Assassin's Creed Unity was glitchy as hell, with people's eyes popping out of their faces, just weird, horrific character contortions. You name it, you've probably seen it all at this point. But now looking back at the game, now with it at least, running okay, it's a decent Assassin's Creed game. And it is absolutely a gorgeous one. From the new Parker animations with how the character can climb up and down buildings, which still blows my mind that they didn't continue that in further games, to just the level of detail of Paris and down to the city street levels filled with characters to the brimmings of Revolution, to the recreation of Notre Dame Cathedral and how Ubisoft has actually used that as historical reference, since the actual cathedral, unfortunately did catch fire a few years ago. It says a lot about the graphical detail, the fidelity of the game. This thing was something else. And unfortunately, because of the early critical reception, the technical state it was in, it really didn't get its chance to really shine, and to live up to what it at least technically could have been. But with this one, I will say, if you haven't played it, or if you played it at launch and weren't happy with it, go back and check it out. You might be happy to find a fairly decent and really good looking Assassin's Creed game. Next over at number 5, we have Blair Witch VR, which is a spin-off of Bloober Team's first-person Blair Witch game. Blair Witch VR, if you ask us, is actually a better way to play the Blair Witch game, which ultimately we thought was fine. It had some cool words, some cool horror moments, and some interesting little mechanics, but didn't really quite live up to the brand name that it's associated with, that hype. However, put that in VR and the game just feels just better enough to really make it compelling and interesting. Is it an exact recreation of the original movie? No way, and as long as you don't go in expecting that, you're in for a pretty good time. Unfortunately, Blair Witch VR didn't really seem to take off, at least in our radar, our sphere of the world. We haven't seen too many people talk about it. It actually has had its fair share of negative user reviews, but the more you look into it, it does seem like a lot of people are happy with the game, and rightfully so. It's a cool little experience and it definitely goes places, and also there's a very good dog in the game, so it gets points for that. Next, over at number 4, we have Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey. Now, this game wasn't necessarily a financial flop. It did go on to sell 1 million units, they have confirmed. But this was a game where visually it looked awesome, and ultimately we think personally here, the gameplay concepts didn't quite live up to the promise. Ancestors' whole premise was kind of like you starting as a primitive creature, and slowly learning how to communicate, use tools, hunt to survive, and slowly kind of work your way up through to the Homo sapien. It had really dense jungle forests, incredibly detailed animals and wildlife, and really incredible animations. Especially as you're running and climbing, and to see your character go from walking on 4 limbs to sort of walking upright was very cool, but it ultimately amounted to a very repetitive game that didn't really go anywhere and didn't have the payoff you were probably hoping. It gets a lot of points for creativity. We still really thought the game was pretty cool, but it really didn't stick the landing. It still looks gorgeous, but I don't know man, it looked really great, but it didn't quite stick the landing. And please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, because this helps the channel a lot. It would be very helpful. Next over at number 3, we have Agony. Agony is incredible looking. I mean, look at this. If you like any type of horror, be it sci-fi horror, body horror, grotesque horror, just things that look like metal albums, Agony is a dream come true. Unfortunately, The actual game build around it is just kind of like a substandard horror game where you run from a creature and you hide, and that's really it, and some pretty straightforward linear levels. Basically, the whole design of the game, the way it plays, does not take advantage of really showing off at any point just how good it can really look. The creature designs, the environments themselves, the gore, the nastiness of all of it doesn't reach the heights it could have, and that's a shame because I think of any game on this list, this one specifically, it's really just about the creative concepts, the real art design behind the whole thing, and how unfortunately, the actual game really held it back. It was a bummer. According to some reports, it did do fairly well for the developers. It sold over 160,000 copies, so for a smaller studio, maybe you can't call it a flop, but it certainly did not take the world by storm. Now down to number 2, we have the Dark Pictures anthology, Man of Medan. Now this is Supermassive Games' horror anthology series. This was the first game. Man of Medan took place in the South Pacific Ocean and was about 4 college friends on an adventure that, of course, slowly becomes a creepy horror story. And this was, of course, hot off the heels of their success of Until Dawn, so expectations were really high, and Man of Medan, at least for us here, wasn't so great. We didn't enjoy it, we didn't think the payoff was too great, and playing it was kind of boring. That being said, we do not want to dunk on them as a whole. We still really like the developers, and the Dark Pictures anthology actually ended up getting much stronger. House of Ashes, the last game that has been published in this Dark Picture thing, is actually really good, so don't get it twisted, but the first game we weren't big fans of, but still, it looked incredible. Just the dark, creepy ship, everything wet, really did wonders and blew us away and kind of actually saved the game for us. We're glad that Supermassive Games stuck with the whole Dark Pictures thing and ended up making better games out of this. They all look really great graphically, from facial captures to the way the actors look in the game to the details, the lighting, they do a great job. Now down to number 1, of course, we were gonna mention it, The Order 1886. This was a PlayStation 4 game, it was hipped up, it looked incredible, but unfortunately it was way too short and left people not really satisfied. Now I am an apologist for this game. I actually really love it despite you being able to beat it in like 4 hours, which is an absolute disappointment. The visual style is awesome. This different take on 1886's London with a kind of sci-fi spin on it. You're a badass, you're Galahad. You're shooting dudes and creatures with cool laser guns, and it's tight in a really cool gothic style setting. This game looked downright incredible for the time. It was a PlayStation 4 first party game, and it had some banger visuals to it, and unfortunately it never really got updated, you know? Playing it on PS5 now, if you replay it, it never really got any love. It's still 30 FPS, and we don't know if we're ever going to get a sequel because it seems like Sony really moved on after this. People weren't really satisfied, and then that was it. I'm still out here waiting for The Order 1887, but that's just me. Those are some games with great visuals that didn't really turn out so well, one way or another. We got some bonus examples for you as well, including Resident Evil Resistance. That was that multiplayer add-on to the modern Resident Evil games that looked really great because they're running in the modern Resident Evil gameplay engine, so characters and environments look stunning, but unfortunately, the game didn't really take off. And then we gotta mention Killzone Shadowfall. The often forgotten Killzone game, the PlayStation 4 launch title game that looked absolutely incredible but was just a totally forgettable Killzone game. Still, those are some games that we think the graphics were at least worth celebrating over anything. You know, we were a little negative here, but we wanted to talk about some pretty stuff. So we wanted to hear from you guys in the comments. Is there a game out there that you played that had great graphics, but just didn't live up to your hype, or you just weren't into it? Or was it a commercial flop, anything? Let's talk down in the comments. If you had fun with us watching this video today, clicking the like button's all you gotta do. It really helps us out. But if you're new, consider subscribing over here, cause we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.